Okay. Um, I I think we're live on YouTube now. Okay, so hi everyone. Welcome to the June edition of the monthly VueJS Nigeria Community Meetup. We're currently live on Zoom as well as YouTube, and this promises to be a very insightful and interactive meetup. We currently have two amazing speakers on board. Where we have Abu Bakri rather. He'll be speaking on optimizing your Vue.js application, and also we're going to be having Oluwaseyi Bello, who will be speaking on PWAs with Vue. We'll be having Abdul Kudus first on stage to give his talk. So Abdul Kudus, if you're ready, over to you.
All right, yeah, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can. Hi, Abdul Kudus.
Yeah, so do I have to share my video or I can just present?
It's fine, you can share your slides if you're more comfortable.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Okay, yeah, please confirm if you can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
All right. Yeah, so hello everyone. My name is Abdul Kudus. You just call me Abdul for short. I'm a front-end developer at Outsource Global. I tend to write a lot of JavaScript and I love preaching about it also. So you could call me JavaScript evangelist. I'm also into community development. I'm co-lead for a GDG, my local community. So that's my Twitter handle. You can find me on Twitter. If you have any questions also, you could DM me. So today we'll be looking at optimizing your VueJS application, basically. So web performance is a very important topic that a lot of developers tend to ignore mostly. And it can be very difficult to optimize your web applications when you don't consider it from the start. So after you build your application and you decide to optimize it, it can be very difficult because the application has become so large that you don't know where to start. So this talk will be focused on how you can optimize your VueJS application, how you can think about performance when building your Vue application. Now, so before we start, what exactly is web performance? Okay. Yeah, so what exactly is VueJS performance, right? What exactly is web performance, rather? So it basically refers to how fast your website loads in the browser. So people visit, for example, google.com, and it takes about 15 seconds to load. That is a very serious problem that needs to be addressed. So web performance can range from objective measurements like time to load, time to interactive, first contentful paint, or could be subjective measurements like hey, how fast does the site load on your end? Yeah. So why should you bother really? I mean, I have built my web application, right? Do I really need to consider performance? Well, the thing is, research has shown that a lot of people tend to leave your application when it doesn't load within 3 seconds. Now, I currently reside in Nigeria, so Nigeria is not one of those developed countries per se, so we don't have the 5G internet and all of that yet. So, we can be patient and probably give it about 10 seconds, but eventually people begin to leave your site if it takes long to load. So a site with a very good performance score, tend to improve user retention. So if you have a CMS, for example, like Jumia or Konga, and your site takes a very long time to load, if you are the developer in charge of building Jumia and you didn't consider web performance while building it, there are several other e-commerce applications like Jumia. People tend to just leave your site and it can be disastrous. I mean, I saw a research that Amazon lost about 7% of their users just because their site took 1 second slower to load. Now that's a lot of money if you consider how large Amazon is, and that is those are the little things that we need to put into consideration while building our application. Now, this is just a little statistics that says 1 in 4 visitors will abandon your site that takes more than 4 seconds to load. 46% of the users don't revisit poorly performing websites. So if your sites, didn't give them a very nice impression at first, they probably won't come back to visit it. 64% of shoppers who are dissatisfied with their site visit will shop somewhere else next time. So the typical example I gave, you have a store in Jumia and your site doesn't load on time, we'll probably go back to e-commerce applications like Konga to look for what they're looking for. And there's also a 1 second delay reduces customer satisfaction by 16%. Now, these stats might not really bother you when you're building side projects, but when you're building real life applications that a lot of people will use and heavily depends on you having a lot of users, you need to take these little things into consideration. Now, moving on to how can you improve the performance of your VueJS application? Yeah, so the first one is lazy loading routes or components. So the way Vue works is when you try to build your Vue applications for deployment, Webpack is a bundler. It tries to, get all of the libraries, everything, and bundles it into JavaScript file that serves to the browser. So the first one on the left it's quite popular, though it's a very bad practice. You can import all your routes in the router.js and just use them in the components. But the problem with this is when you're trying to build your application for deployment, Webpack is going to get all of these components. So if you have your home.vue, your about.vue, your new post.vue, it's going to bundle all of this together into a single JavaScript file. This can be this can affect performance heavily because you probably don't want to load about.vue when your user is visiting your home page. So imagine you have like several other pages about.vue, contacts.vue, and several other components really, and you're just importing all of them at once. So when I visit home.vue, you are giving me contacts.vue, about.vue when I really don't need them, right? So the one on the right is the better way to do it. So the only thing I am importing at first is the home.vue. So that way I'm sure when the user visits home.vue, you are only giving me home.vue. And when I visit new post, that is when I'm importing the new post. So I am not building it initially, and that doesn't increase the size of my application. Now, the second one is avoid using watchers for resource intensive tasks. So watchers is one of the methods provided by Vue that allow you to, listen for a change in data property and does something. So there are several expensive operations that you can perform in JavaScript applications. There are event listeners. There are event listeners like scroll, like resize. There are key press event listeners also. So these are expensive operations that you don't want to always be listening for. It's now worse when you put them in watchers. So what happens when you add a method in watcher is it runs anytime the data property changes, and this could potentially cause a re-rendering of your application, like the entire application will re-render. Now, when you're trying to resize the browser, for example, and you now put that in your watcher, every time you try to resize, it's going to re-render the application, and you might not necessarily notice it at first, but then something like resize or scroll is something that happens very regularly, right? So you could have probably 1,000 scroll events in probably a minute, and imagine re-rendering the application 1,000 times. Now, if you absolutely want to listen for scroll or resize events, there is a debounce function or a throttling function. So basically what this allows you to do is you don't fire all the events at once. So if you have like a 100 scroll 100 scroll events at once, all you just need to do is just pick the last one and you fire the method for that particular one. So instead of listening for all the 100, you're just firing the event for one. Now, the third one, this is also a very popular practice, and it's really not developers' fault. So use NPM libraries sparingly. You might be on a deadline. We're given a feature to build, and there is an NPM library that does that easily for you. right? So, I mean, just go to Google, okay, how to do this. And you saw an NPM library, oh, cool. And you go to your code and run NPM install or yarn add to install the library. You worked on the feature and it worked. Your NPM library was able to do the job for you. But one thing you might have failed to recognize is how large the library is. So when you build your application for final deployment, all these libraries that you use in your application end up getting added to your final build. Now imagine you have 10 NPM libraries that are about 100 kilobytes large. This could make your application probably larger than 1 megabyte, probably 2 megabytes. And 2 megabyte might seem small, but it's actually quite large. I mean, it's actually best practice to not allow your application to exceed 1,000 kilobytes, right? As much as you can, try to make sure it's the entire build of your application is less than 1,000 kilobytes. That's 1 megabyte. So one rule of thumb I usually do is before looking for an NPM library, one, try to make sure um, you there's no native API for that. So if you check Mozilla Developer Network, the MDN resource, you are absolutely sure that the browser doesn't have a native API that you can use to achieve what you want. Or if it has it, probably it's not supported by all browsers. So maybe you need like a polyfill of some sort. Or if it's something you could just spare about 31 minutes to build your 30 minutes to an hour to build yourself, consider doing it rather than looking for an NPM library. Another thing is I see a lot of people use libraries like Lodash and Moments. These are very large libraries. I think Moments is about 2 megabytes or probably more. So I was working on a project where Lodash and Moments were used, and my job was basically to improve the performance of the application. Now, after building the entire application, I noticed it was about 2 megabytes in size, and that seriously affected the performance when I ran a Lighthouse score on the application. So I went through the code base to see where Lodash was used. Funny enough, they used Lodash quite all right, but they only used it to check the size of an array, and it was shocking because there are several ways you could check the size of an array natively with JavaScript, and there's the length method, which is like the most common. So why import Lodash just because you want to check the length of an array, right? So I removed that. Then I also went to check for moments to see where it was being used. Now, for those that are not so familiar with moments, so basically what moment allows you to do is date formatting. So to format date in JavaScript is not so straightforward. So moment gives you this methods that allow you to format your data um, as well as you want. So for that particular use case, they use moments just to get like the short name for each month. So if you're in February, just return FEB. If you're in January, return JAN. But this is something you could do in like 10-15 minutes in JavaScript, and you don't need to import a 2 megabyte library for that. So if you feel it's something you can do by yourself, there's really no need to import an NPM library for that. Now, the fourth one is be absolutely sure you want to register a component globally. So it's quite easy to globally import a component and use it throughout your code base. Typical example is when you have a header component or a footer component. So these are important use cases. You want to be able to globally access your header component or your footer component. But before you globally import this component, be absolutely sure that is what you want to do. So probably have a component called post item. Now, post item, like the name suggests, is probably supposed to be used in the post components, right? But then you globally imported that component. So what happens is in every other view component that you have, post item is going to be imported there. So if you have a cart item, or a cart.view file, that means post item is going to be imported in cart.view, but you really didn't use post item in cart.view. But because you globally imported the post item component, it's going to be used everywhere. So before you do a global import, you have to make sure this component is something that is going to be globally used, right? Because eventually it's going to affect build size of your application, and then this is going to severely affect the performance. Yeah, now the fifth one is one that's very common. I wouldn't say it's the developer's fault, probably again, deadlines, project manager putting down on their neck saying, what's the progress of things, where are we? So avoid displaying a huge list all at once. So probably you have a list of posts and you just want to display it. So maybe it's about 1,000, 10,000 probably. So you just use a V4 to look through all the items in the array and display them in your template. So this is quite easy. I mean, you just do a V4, add a key, and that's it. But then it's going to affect your browser because potentially freeze the window if it's not done right. So one best way to do this is to either paginate the data or you use a virtual scroller. So virtual scroller, take for example, your Twitter feed now. I mean, Twitter has probably several thousands of tweets, right? And it's not just displayed to you all at once. It's as you scroll, it keeps on fetching the new tweets. So that's how it's supposed to be. So rather than displaying a huge list all at once, right? It's better to try to paginate it and display maybe 50 or 20 to the user. So I am going to do a quick demo of how this affects your browser. So probably just going to use my Firefox so I don't crash my phone. This. So basically what I'm doing here is zoom a bit. Yeah, so basically what I'm doing here is I'm looking from 0 to 100,000 and I'm trying to display components that shows item of 0, item of 1. Now, I mean, this is quite simple, right? You'd expect it to just go from, I mean, it's just 100,000, so it shouldn't take so much. But then when I run this and build it in the application and open it in the browser, you'd see how long this takes to and how long it takes to display and probably freeze your browser. So this will take a little while to come up. Let's open this one. All right, so I'm trying to open up the page where I'm going from 0 to 100,000 and displaying the items. So, I mean, usually they expect it to have loaded, and this is my local host. I've never posted this online, so it should be fast, right? But I mean, it's still loading, and if I try to, yeah. Okay, so you get this message that this page is slowing down. Firefox is speed up your browser, stop this page. So, I mean, the browser is already frozen, actually. I can't even expect. So that's like a typical example. So usually when you want to do something like that, you should make sure you are paginating the data or, like I said, use a virtual scroller. So don't display all the 100,000 items at once. Make it maybe 50 per page or 100 per page. Then maybe as user scrolls, you display the next 100. So that way you are not going to, freeze your browser. So that's that. Sorry, I had to rush through. I kind of have like um, somewhere I have to be. It's kind of urgent. So if you have any questions, you can please leave them in the chat sections and I'll get to them as soon as possible. Yeah. So thank you for listening. And that's it from me.
All right. Thank you, Kudus, for sharing your knowledge on optimizing VueJS applications. That was very insightful. Okay, I think you have your first question already. If we can have the slides. So yeah, we'll be sharing the slides on our Twitter after this call. So we're going to just jump into some of these questions that have been raised on our YouTube and on Twitter as well. First, we have a question here from Yomi. Okay, Yomi is asking, how do we use the bounce and throttling to improve our performance of our VueJS application? Yeah, that's your first question.
All right, yeah. So I mentioned things like scroll event listeners or resize event listeners. So I mean, scrolling is something that happens very regularly in application. So if you are listening for a scroll event, right, it's going to probably get fired about 1,000 times or 100 times. And each time this thing fires, you are probably doing something. Maybe every time the user scrolls, you are checking, okay, if an item has got to the top of the page, perform an action. So every time you scroll, it's going to try to fire that method to check and then probably pause a render. So you're probably rendering your application about 1,000 times or 100,000 times. So a debounce is a method that basically it's done, it's based on set timeouts. So how it works is every time an event is fired, it doesn't exactly fire that method. It waits to see if another method is going to be fired. So if you have like 10 scroll listeners, it doesn't fire all 10 at once. Checks, okay, the first one has been fired. Is another going to be fired in the next probably 1 second? If yes, it doesn't, it disregards the first one, then checks, keeps waiting. So if you have about 100 listeners, 100,000, it doesn't fire all at once. It fires just the last one. So this is going to make sure you don't have probably 10,000, 100,000 vendors. You're having just one. So that way you are sure you're not bombarding the browser with so many vendors. Yeah, so that's way the bounce and control improve your performance of your application.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you very much for that answer, Kudus. We have our next question here from Emeka, who is asking, how do we lazy load components? That's the next one.
Yeah, so I guess I'll have to share my screen for this. Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. So basically I don't know, can you make me the host again so I can share my screen? Back to that slide.
Okay.
Says host disabled screen sharing, so I can't share the screen.
One second, please.
All right.
Okay, you can try again.
Okay, all right, cool. Yeah, so here is it basically. So you have this on the right. So if you want to import components in maybe your home.view, you basically use this import statement here. So you import, then you add the path to the view file. So rather than importing all at once using import home dots from this, what you just do is you make it sort of like a function and you use your arrow function and import, then you add the link to the view components there. So that way you are sure that, I think a typical example is when you have dialogues or modals on your page. I mean, you don't want to load up a modal when there's nothing that happens on load. So you lazy load that particular modal and you only import it when maybe the user clicks on the submit button and you show the modal that asks them, are they sure they want to submit? That's like a typical example. So basically what you just do is you use this import statement and in brackets you add the path to particular view component. Yeah. So I hope that answers your question. If you still have further questions, you could just drop them.
All right. We have also another question from Duret Nan. who says, what's the optimal interval you recommend when using the bounds with event listeners?
So it actually depends. For me, I use just 100 milliseconds. That's about 0.1 second. Yeah.
All right. I think we don't have any further questions for you for now, Kudus. Thank you. All right. So please don't forget to like and subscribe on our YouTube channel as well. Share the link. The conversation is also live on Twitter as well at our official Twitter handle, and that will be added to the chats in a bit. Okay. Up next, we have Oluwaseyi Bello, who's going to be taking us through how to develop PWAs, that's progressive web apps, using Vue. So Oluwaseyi, are you ready for us? Okay, so Oluwaseyi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Right. Okay. So take it away when you're ready.
Yes, I would come in.
Also, in the meantime, we also have the link to Abdul's slides in the chats on Zoom here. So if anyone wants to see that, you can access it there.
Omar, sorry. So this is my first time using Zoom on my PC. So to share my screen, I would need to quickly restart it. It on my Mac. I'm sorry. So just give me 2 to 3 minutes to do that.
Okay.
Okay. So Umar, we have 3 minutes while we wait for Shay to come back. Umar, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're going to wait for him a bit.